Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Inept General, and welcome to my Total War Warhammer Lore and Army video on the Fimir. Now, the Fimir, for me, my mind was blown when we heard they were going to be included as units in the Norsca DLC, which is the pre-order free LC for Total War Warhammer 1, but if you pre-order Total War Warhammer 2. Now, these guys are perhaps one of the most forgotten species in the Warhammer world over the years by Games Workshop, the creators of Warhammer. But let's get into their armies, and I'll also, at the end of this video, go into a little bit of their history, when they made their first appearance, and why they kind of disappeared off the face of the map for a number of years. But let's kick things off with who they are and where they come from. So the Fimir are an amphibious species and make their homes in the moors and bogs and wetlands of probably most like the northern old world or the northern part of the worlds altogether. They are a truly ancient race and thought to have been around even before the rise of mankind in the Warhammer world. They range in color from green to a kind of muddy brown, and they tend to build shelters that are very crude. Maybe like from the outsider, they just kind of look like a pile of boulders and rocks slapped together, and that's kind of where the Fimir live. Now, the Fimir hate sunshine. They can't really stand it, and so they kind of emit, either through magically individually or through their shamans, this kind of mist, this miasma that tends to follow them around. So they're almost constantly soaked in this floating mist around them, making them very hard to see and to try and stave off any kind of sunlight. And this is what happens when they follow around, when they go into their warbands, when they move around, this mist moves around with them. Now, as I mentioned, the Fimir are an ancient species, and with the age they were also the first worshippers of the Chaos Gods. And indeed, the Chaos Gods only had eyes for the Fimir. That was until they found the races of man, who they found endlessly more amusing, and decided to make man their playthings rather than the Fimir themselves. As a result, the Fimir were kind of largely abandoned. They had to take to maybe worshipping the odd Chaos Demon instead of the gods themselves, because only the Chaos Demons were deign enough to pay them much attention. And to get even this little attention from the Chaos Demons, if not maybe once in a while get a glance across from the Chaos Gods themselves, they launch into these warbands and tend to take to the Warhammer world, doing human sacrifices, attacking mainly human settlements, because they don't like the way that the Chaos Gods seem to favor these human folk, and so set about putting villages to the torch, kidnapping their inhabitants, and sacrificing them or taking them as slaves either into their society or back to their homesteads for later sacrifice. So they will march cloaked in this mist, suddenly appear on a village or town, or even just some marching troops, set upon them, sacrifice them to the Chaos Gods in the hopes of gaining what little favor they could. And apart from food, this is the only real reason they venture out of their home territories, is to get human sacrifices so they can have these rituals and really just boost what little gifts the gods choose to bestow upon them, or even demons choose to bestow upon them. In terms of how they run their lives, the Fimir are really kind of split into a caste system, with different Fimir doing different things. At the bottom of the caste system is the slaves called the Shirls. And the Shirls, now I'm not 100% on this myself. I'm not sure whether the Shirls are solely Fimir slaves taken from inter-clan conflicts, or whether that includes some human or slaves from other races that they've taken in battles or pillages, but they are just known as the slave caste, the Shirls. Now, after the Shirls, you move up the chain a little bit to the Fim. Now, the Fim are your kind of basic warrior, your basic Fimir, like, guy. And it is a guy. These are all guys, the Fim. So these are the Fim warriors. And they just go about the basic kind of warrior, sacrificing, building. These are just your typical guys. Now, after the Fim, you get the more elite warriors, like the true fighters, the true champions of their people, and those are the Fim. Now, the Fim are the stronger, the bigger, the better fighters. These guys are the elite warriors of the Fim, and they will more than not be around what is described as the Fim nobles or the Fim leaders, and they will be their retinue of protectors, barring all else. So these are the elite of the Fimir warriors. Now, moving on from the Fim, we are going into the Fim Warlords. So the Fim noble, the Fim warlord, just like their leaders. Now, it's not 100% clear why there are Fim nobles as such, but perhaps it's proven through strength or through inheritance. I doubt it's through inheritance because, as we'll learn later on, Fimir seem to operate around a kind of queen hive. So there are queens, and I have to assume that all Fimir are born from these queens, and thus it seems probably that one becomes a Fimir noble or a Fim warlord out of tests of strength. But that's just an assumption on the way their society works. Now, some Fimir males are born with the gift for magic, and this is where the Dryak, or what would later be known as the Bale Fiends, come from. Now, these are the male magic casters of the Fimir. They are particularly skilled. They will lead an army over a warlord, and there's almost usually one of these with every kind of war band or warring troop that the Fimir ever send out. These guys will kind of lead them. They'll probably be the most intelligent of the group, and that's kind of how they work. Now, the Fimir themselves have been rumored or said to be part demoned in their own right, which makes it a bit stranger. And so in some of the older rule sets, they did have access to demonic spells. So back in 3rd edition, when this was first sort of set about. However, they have been changed, and there were new rules written when the Fimir came back into fashion in later years. And that's when they were given the Lords of Shadow, the Lords of Fire. They were given the Cold-Blooded special rule, which is actually a special rule that one usually sees in the Lizardmen army, which means that they just get a boost to leadership, effectively. And they have something called the Eye of the Bale Fiend. Now, all Fimir are Cyclopean, meaning they have the one eye. And much like the Cygor, whose one eye can see into, like, the winds of magic, so is the idea that the Bale Fiends and the Fimir, maybe even themselves, all see the winds of magic as well. Thus, in coming up Total War Warhammer Norsca DLC, they probably have magic attacks, the idea being that they can tap into the winds of magic, even the most basic Fimir warriors. So the Bale Fiends, with this eye, were able to tap into winds of magic more effectively, which kind of, like, I'm not going to get too much into rules of the tabletop, but just kind of gave them a boost to their magical ability, to their ability to have enough pools of magic, and to dispel magic as well. And I would have liked to have seen these guys. They weren't ever given it officially, I don't think. But because they are amphibious, it would be nice to see them with the aquatic special rule that the Lizardmen have, meaning they're not punished by moving over wetlands or bogs or rivers and stuff like that, because they are an amphibious species. That would be a nice little touch to give them as well as a special rule, if that ever makes it into Total War Warhammer 2 or the combined map of the two games. So that's something I think should be added. Now, last but not least, the heads of Fimir culture. Now, I have no idea how to say this, and I've kind of been guessing everything because I've never heard any of the Fimir stuff said out loud. The Mirag Wizard. Now, these are the matriarchs of Fimir society. There's one of these in every clan, and only one. If one of them ever gives birth to a female and brings her to full age, they will then split the clan in two, and half the clan will go with the newer leader, and half the clan will stay with this matriarch. They are the most powerful wizards amongst the Fimir, and maybe we might see them later on in Total War Warhammer. But they live sort of relatively long time, but if they were ever to die, the clan itself embarks on something called a death quest. Now, this is whereby the whole clan starts to go, oh god, we either need to find a new matriarch, or we need to die in the opportunity of finding one. So they will travel far and wide until they find a Mirag wizard who will allow them to come into their society. So that's what they end up doing. So these are the matriarchs, the heads of all Fimir society, and they're not making an appearance yet in Total War Warhammer, but you never know, maybe one day down the line that we might see them. And that kind of brings us to the end of the Fimir army. There's not a huge amount written about these guys over the years, but let me give you a bit about their history. Back in sort of 1991, when 3rd edition was starting to be written, one of the owners of Warhammer, a guy called Brian Ansell, had decided to include a race that they could be unique to Warhammer, that no other races had, like goblins, dwarves, elves. Everyone has them in their games, but let's get something that's unique to us. And so he came up with the Fimir, which were based on, I think, a Celtic myth known as the Fimarians. I think that's the basis of what the Fimir were sort of gone on. Now, when they wrote the rules and they did the initial sketches, all the Fimir looked like they were kind of human-sized. But when it came to the actual modeling, what ended up happening is a chap, I think, called Nick Bibby, ended up sculpting them the size of ogres, so making them huge, which by making them huge, you had to sell them pretty expensively. And their stats were only written for like human-sized units. So no one really ended up buying them. They were very ugly looking. That might have contributed to it as well. But you know what? I think the Skaven are pretty ugly looking and people love them. So they just became completely unpopular. And by the next edition of the game, they were completely written out. And there were a couple of mentions over the years here and there, but nothing really major. And it wasn't until, I think, 2011 when I think it was a Storm of Magic book came out that reintroduced the idea of the Fimir Bale Fiend, that they started to come back into prominence. And that's when they made the models of the bigger guys with the massive great weapons that the Fimir in Total War Warhammer seemed to be based on, made an appearance later on in 2011. And they kind of made a bit of a minor comeback as kind of mercenary units here and there. But on the whole, they disappeared for 20 years and then kind of just came back. But these guys were considered maybe one of the largely forgotten races of the Warhammer world, so it's great to see them making a bit of a comeback in Total War Warhammer, and you never know, they may be expanded upon in the future. But I hope that sort of taught you a bit about them, about their caste system, about how their society runs, guys. As always, thank you all for watching, and a special thanks goes out to my patrons, Reese, Colin, Thomas, Mateus, Samuel, Matthews, David, Sign of the Emperor, and Niblets. Thank you guys, and I hope to catch you all on the next one. Alright guys, thanks very much.